Alright, so I'm finally ready to have a look at the timing on the K25. I've been through every conceivable alternative that I can think of for why it's not running correctly, and the last thing that I'm left with is the cam timing. It does have a custom cam in there. It's been in there for a few years now and it was running just fine with it for ages. But I think what the actual issue is that by solving one problem, I've created another. In some of my earlier videos, you would have seen that I replaced the adapter plate for the 32-36 Weber that's on the engine now. And the one that I took off had a massive gap, basically just letting the air-fuel mixture straight out of the primary, straight out, not into the manifold, just into the engine bay. So because I've fixed that and it's now getting the appropriate amount of fuel, it seems like it's flooding every time I go to start the car. If it fires up first go, then it seems to run okay, and that's what happened a few times, and I managed to tune it pretty well, but it still had a considerable amount of pinging or pre-detonation at higher revs. After a while, the engine will just die. And so it pretty much comes down to what I think is a cam timing issue. Now, I did get it to run okay before I replaced the distributor. It's got an electronic one in there now. It has got a massive amount of advance, and that is to compensate for the very poor or very retarded cam timing. I did put that cam in that engine when I put it in the car a few years ago, and I was told that it was basically a slightly more aggressive cam than standard. Having a look at the cam sheet though makes me think that it's a little bit more aggressive than that, but either way it does need to be dialed in. I've made that more difficult for myself obviously by having the engine in the car as opposed to doing it outside the car when I put it in, but that's the consequences of my own actions. So in order to dial a cam in, you need what's called a cam degree wheel, and to attach it to the engine and to turn the crank, you usually need what's called a crank socket. Now, admittedly, I did have a very brief look and nothing jumped out and hit me in the face. Seems like there's no readily available crank sockets for this engine. And even if there was, normally these are around a minimum of 150 Australian dollars each. There's also the cam degree wheel, which you'll need as well. These vary in size, complexity, and price, but they sort of start at around that 50 to 60 Australian dollar mark as well. Two of them together, we're looking at a minimum of at least 200 Australian dollars. Seeing as I already own a 3D printer, I figured why not do a design and try and print some. And I've got to say, I'm actually really happy with these. So come and have a look and I'll step you through how I use them. Here's a quick look at what the items are. The cam degree wheel is essentially just a disc that has markings usually in 1 degree increments from 0 up to 360 degrees. Sometimes you'll see wheels that have other markings on there that may be specific to certain engines, compression, exhaust stroke, etc. But the main concept is the same. The larger the wheel, the easier it is to be more accurate. You have a greater circumference to work with. Imagine trying to mark out 360 degrees on a 5-cent piece. But the larger the wheel, the more space you'll need, and being that the engine is still in the car here, I decided on a design for a 220mm diameter wheel with 1 degree increments. As for the crank socket, I decided to make it large enough so that I can use the same design and modify it for different cranks. I'd like to also use this for the SR20 in my 180SX as well, and I also wanted to 3D print this thread and nut on the top here to secure it to the wheel. As the thread is an M30, there's no real issue with detail as it's so large, but for the same reason I chose not to and almost never print threads as small as the M4 here on the back. It's just too small. So I've just printed this as an undersized hole here that I'll now post drill and tap by hand. But as you can see, this M30 thread has come out really well, and I'm also quite happy with this knurling on here. The crank socket obviously goes on the end of the crank, the degree wheel fits over the top, it's secured by this nut eventually, and that holds it all in place. The final thing that I'll make is a pointer which will attach to the engine and will allow us to keep track of the wheel's position as we rotate it. That'll make more sense if I show you, so let's go and make that now. I don't really know how long I'm going to need this to be once I bend it all up and everything, so I'm just going to cut out, I reckon, about this much and see how I go. Trying this thing where I don't overthink everything. I reckon about here. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, about there. But we'll see. We'll see how we go. The reason I'm bent down here is because I'm going to sharpen the end to be a point. I've almost completely destroyed this belt that's on this sander, but it should be enough to do this. Then I'll change it for something else. I've picked a bolt on the front of the engine that I plan to use as the pickup point. So I actually almost already made a boo-boo, and I'll show you why. So I was going to use one of these without really thinking about it to secure this in place, but cam wheel needs to go over those, so that's not much good. I suppose I probably could tuck it in here at this top one and go around, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to put a bolt in this one here. So Let's see if this is actually going to be long enough now. So I've loosely done that up there, and I'll be able to bend this around and down to the wheel. But before I do that, I'm going to have to take off the crank bolt, which I shouldn't have put on there like that to turn the engine over, which is very naughty, so I've got to get that off now. So you really shouldn't do this like this. Oh, yeah. But I'm gonna. Car's in gear, handbrake's on. Let's see if I can... Oh wow, I got it. Amazing. So for an M4 thread, I'm pretty sure we're meant to use a 3.3mm drill. But I don't have one of those, so we're going to use a 3mm. The hole should already be pretty close to on size. You can see I don't think we even took anything out then, but it's just to clear it out and make sure it's round. 4 by 0.7. Just going to put it in the drill like a barbarian. A little bit of kerosene for cutting fluid. That'll do, I reckon. I should probably make sure that this is all going to work. This is looking pretty good. Whoop. Nearly made a boo-boo then. Car's still in gear. Oh, too amazing. Let's tighten that up a bit more. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Got that on there so I can make sure I'm going to clear the gear. I'm going to take this off and sharpen it to a point, and then I reckon we're about ready to get started. It was a while ago now, but hopefully you remember in the last video I made up this plate here to mount the dial gauge on, and I designed and 3D printed this mount for the dial gauge as well. I need to remove the rocker assembly so that I can go directly onto one of the push rods, and I need to also add the extension that I purchased onto this. But before I do that, I need to work out where true top dead center is, and that'll be through the spark plug hole on cylinder 1. So we'll do that now. Magic, let's get the extension. Let's try and work out the best way to put this. Oh, I need that to be tighter. Probably this needs to be lower. There. What am I going to do? And fiddling around with this off camera for about 5 minutes. And I've come to the conclusion that the gauge needs to sit here, and the simplest solution, rather than 3D printing something else for this, attach this onto there and then attach it onto the rod. So BRB. Version on the back of the dial gauge is M6. I mean 10mm. 10mm enough. Hard to do this with the camera in the way. Not that it really matters, but there's no reason not to make it look nice if we can. Go straight in with a 3mm drill bit. Oh no! Plugged in. Even though it's somewhat unnecessary and it's going to add some extra time, we'll chamfer these two. So now you should be able to see what I'm thinking here. The piston's approximately at the top, by the way. I've already determined what's pretty close to TDC, and you can see there hopefully what I'm planning to do. So hopefully I should be able to secure this all in place and see how we go. 135 mils center to center, round number, and go to 130. Still got a little bit of my mark from before, and I've got to be honest, that does not look straight. This is dumb. That was pretty straight. So now that's done, I have to drill all those holes again, which would be annoying. Let's see how we went. That's a 6mm. That's an M8. Right. Let's have a look and see this dial gauge move. Oh, it's already tricky because the engine's on a slant, obviously, and therefore the gauge has got to come in on a slant, but we're looking pretty good, I reckon. This is going to work. It just needs a little bit of tweaking with the setup. I think I might even swap that arm around to get a bit more reach. But anyway, I can cut this off now. So marked it before. God, I can't think of words today. All right. Used my brain in the interim. I hope I did. I'm going to attach this that way. Wow, that's genius, Ryan. You're so smart. Can't believe you didn't think of that sooner. You dummy. I thought of it now. So that's all that matters. Don't want to bend the arm in there. Because of the angle that it's coming in on the piston, that is a very real possibility. So I'm going to try and avoid that. Let's see if I can't dial this in. Work out where we are with this cam wheel. Set the wheel to 0. Now, I can't record both at the same time. Well, I could set up 2 cameras, but I'm not going to do that. You're just going to have to trust me. This isn't working. So basically what I'm doing here is a method for finding true top dead center. Ideally, you would actually do this before the engine's in the car and actually before the head is even on the block. However, as I don't want to remove the head from the engine that's in the car already, it can still be done. It's just a little bit more tricky. So this is obviously the head removed from the engine, and these are where the pistons go. We're trying to determine when the piston will be at its highest point in this cylinder. That's true top dead center. It's coming in through the spark plug hole, and as you can see before, that's on quite an angle. You can see here that coming in through this hole like that means that our gauge is also coming in on an angle. As we rotate the crank down here, the pistons obviously move up and down within the cylinders. Even though we're going in the same direction, as the piston comes up and then comes down, eventually it reaches its highest point. We'll pause for a second and then come back down again. Essentially, when the piston is at top dead center, the gauge will stop climbing higher. Then as you keep rotating in the same direction, the piston will begin to move downwards as it continues through its stroke. Set the wheel at what we approximated to be top dead center, then moved clockwise 50 thou, or approximately 1.3 millimeters of travel on the dial gauge. Once the dial gauge indicated 1.3 millimeters of travel, we took note of the position of the degree wheel at that point, which was 337 degrees. And returned back to our starting position and then did the same thing in the opposite direction, which gave us a value on the degree wheel of 4 degrees. The difference between those two numbers is 27 degrees, and we then divide that value by 2, which gives us 13.5 degrees, which on our degree wheel will show top dead center being at 350.5 degrees, which is basically what I approximated, but I was off by 0.5 of a degree. This may not seem like much, but this is the baseline for our determinations, and any errors or approximations here will be multiplied further down the line. You'll also be wondering why I have this 3D printed cam sprocket here, as well as the factory one. See the extra holes in this cam wheel here, and these allow me to advance or retard the cam by a set amount. On the factory cam here, there's only the one hole, and so it only allows the cam gear to be in one position. However, even with a standard cam, there are advantages to being able to dial it in, and especially with an aftermarket cam, you almost always need to be able to adjust the factory cam timing. I've covered this in other videos, but essentially this cam sprocket would allow 5 degrees of adjustment, either advanced or retarded. The initial plan for it was that I could use it to determine the best position of the cam, and then I could drill just one extra hole in the factory cam gear and get it into position. Ideally, however, you would have a custom cam that had a slot rather than these holes, and that would allow for even finer adjustment in less than 1 degree increments at a time, as opposed to 5 at a time. Eventually I'll make such a gear, but right now I'm just trying to get the engine to run again, and doing this alone should get me a fair bit closer than where I am now, so we'll start with that and we'll see how we go. The final thing I'm doing here now that we've set top dead center is loosening the cam wheel so that I can reset its position to 0 while keeping the crank in the same spot. Alright, so now that we're sure that we are in fact true top dead center, I can remove this. Now I can take the rockers off because I need to get access directly to one of the push rods. Well, not one of them. Intake push rod on cylinder number 1. Drop this in the engine bay. What do we got here? 12 mil. 12 mil. See my knuckles copping it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, what anyone says, I don't reckon you should put too much force on the ratcheting part of these spanners. I'll get a Ziploc bag. Normally I'd write on the bag, but these are going straight back in there. Also, how good's this mug that our friend Maya made me? I'll put her Instagram handle on here now. Go check her out. I didn't really think this through about where I'm going to put this. Whoops. The washer pretty side up. Everyone knows washers have a right way up. Don't care what you say. Oh my god. Baby shifter for a little baby engine. Now it's time for the last 3D printed piece that I've made for this task. This. Damn it. A couple of minutes on the 3D printer, 20 actually, and we're back with a longer guide. Pretty straight actually. Let's kind of fiddle with this a little bit more. Okay, so before I go any further, there's a couple of things. So because I don't want to pull the 3D printed gear off the other engine right now, I'll show you on this engine what I'm doing. Normally the gear is around there, whereas you can see on the engine that's in the car, the valve's opening around here. In actuality, on any sort of cam, if you were to dial it in properly, you would likely find that there's a little bit of adjustment to be had doing it this way because it's so much more accurate than relying on timing marks, because there's the introduction of an issue called tolerance stacking. There's all different things that could be out of alignment. The timing mark on cam gear could be slightly off, the timing mark on the crank, the keyway for the Woodruff key, all sorts of things. The other thing that's worth mentioning at this point is that there isn't a whole lot of information provided with the cam card that I was given. And on top of that, I've never actually done this before. So I'm pretty sure I understand the theory correctly, but feel free to comment here if I've done something wrong. This is the way that I've interpreted it. This is the way that I'm going to do it. So let's have a go. My interpretation of that cam card, I need to go to 22 degrees before top dead center. We now need 0.006 inch of intake valve lift, and I've got it on exhaust. I didn't get much sleep last night, so I'm going to blame it on that. Oh, that's so annoying. I had this set up so well. No use crying now. Take it off. I messed it up. Whoops. Well, I'm glad that's over. I've got the wheel at 22 degrees before top dead center. Now I'm going to rotate the cam until I get 0.006 inches of intake valve lift. Because I'm going straight off the push rod, I don't need to account for the 1:5 rocker ratio because the rockers are not there. 0.006 inches, 0.152 millimeters. Let's go 0.1, 0.5, close as we're going to get. Now let's have a look. So this didn't print that well because I printed this side down on the print bed, and I didn't really account for it because I don't really care about it. But what we can see is that this is a fair way out. Let's take this bad boy off and see what we can work out. I have to take the timing wheel off in order to do this, but let's see. Now I don't know if I'll make it past the... Oh, I did. Amazing. I'm going to move the camera out of the way so that I can do this. So it was a bit tricky to mess around with this on camera, and you wouldn't have been able to see much anyway, but I've reattached the factory cam sprocket, re-engaged the chain on both the cam sprocket and the crank sprocket, also re-engaged the timing chain tensioner. This little white mark here represents where the keyway is on the factory cam, the little hole that locates itself on the cam dowel, and you can see here how far around the factory timing mark is from stock. These two marks here are where it was originally. That's about where it is from standard. So we're almost 180 degrees around. And I'll go over to the other engine now and explain that to you. Coming back to the other engine here to explain it a little bit easier, I've made a couple of notes, and basically the cam specs dictated that it should be 0.006 inches of lift at 22 degrees before top dead center. Gone over that already. Basically what I found is that when I set that on the cam locating pin was literally about a quarter of the way off of just locating in the factory hole. Instead, what I did is I just backed the cam off a little bit so that it would line up with the cam sprocket. Instead, that gave us 0.0045 inches of lift at 22 degrees before top dead center, which basically translates to 0.115 millimeters. It's essentially 0.35 millimeters less lift than what the spec sheet dictates it should have. It doesn't reach 0.15 millimeters of lift or 0.006 inches until 16 degrees before top dead center. In the grand scheme of things, compared to what it was before, we are almost 180 degrees out, which is crazy. It's crazy that the engine even ran like that for so long. So there's a couple of reasons why I think that could be, but either way, it was ridiculous. Finally, the reason that I chose not to just drill another hole in the cam sprocket like I said I was going to get it bang on is because the difference was so minimal that I don't know that I actually could have got it any closer than what it is if I had drilled it by hand. Like I said before, if it was a slot and I could get that fine adjustment, then that would be okay. But drilling another hole relative to where the teeth are on the sprocket is just incredibly difficult, especially just using a cheap little drill press and what would have been a 3D printed guide. But that's pretty much it. So the cam's dialed in and I'm going to start putting the engine back together. Before I do that, there are a couple of little things that I think I'll fix up first, seeing as I've already pulled half the engine apart anyway, but I'm pretty happy with that progress. A whole bunch more to come in the upcoming videos, heaps of progress on the KE70 and more stuff on the 25 as well, and maybe even some cheeky 180 stuff. So let me know what you thought of this one and I'll see you in the next one.